San Francisco. Winter 1964. A private room in Oakland's Chinatown. No cameras. No referees. Just two men and maybe 20 witnesses who'd been told to keep quiet. Bruce Lee was 23, already teaching non-Chinese students, breaking an unwritten rule that had held for generations. Some called it progress. Others called it progress. Wong Jack Man had come from across the bay with a group of traditional masters. The meeting wasn't scheduled as a fight, but everyone in that room understood what it could become. No one wrote down what happened next, not immediately. The versions came years later, and they didn't match. But the people who were there remembered the tension, the way the air changed when Wong Jack Man stepped forward, the way Lee's students moved back against the wall. It wasn't a tournament. It wasn't a demonstration. It was something older than that, a challenge delivered quietly in a language most Americans wouldn't understand. And when it was over, one man walked out questioning everything he'd built. That room stayed locked in memory for decades. The fight became a legend. But the aftermath, what Lee did after that's what actually changed martial arts. Bruce Lee had been in Oakland less than 2 years when the letter arrived. It was written in Chinese. Formal. Polite on the surface, but everyone who read it understood the weight underneath. The traditional martial arts community in San Francisco's Chinatown had been watching him. Teaching kung fu to non-Chinese students wasn't just unconventional. It violated an understanding that had existed for generations. He'd opened a school on Broadway, called it the Jun Fan Kung Fu Institute. His students were mixed Chinese-American, white, black. He didn't ask about lineage. Word traveled fast. And not everyone approved. Wong Jack Man was not a celebrity. He was a martial artist from the Chinatown community, skilled in northern Shaolin and Xingyiquan. Trained since childhood. Respected. Traditional. When he walked into Lee's school that day in late 1964, he didn't come alone. He brought other practitioners with him. Older men. Men who'd been teaching longer than Lee had been alive. Lee's wife, Linda, was there. So were a few of his students. The space wasn't large. Just a room with wooden floors, some equipment, mirrors on one wall. Wong Jack Man's group stood near the entrance. Lee stood in the center. The conversation started in Cantonese. Linda couldn't follow all of it, but she could read the room. Wong Jack Man's message was clear. Lee was teaching outsiders. This dishonored Chinese martial arts. It disrespected tradition. The implication was that he didn't have the authority to spread these teachings beyond the Chinese community. Lee didn't back down. He argued that martial arts shouldn't be restricted by ethnicity. That skill mattered more than heritage. His voice stayed controlled, but the tension in his shoulders was visible. The group didn't leave. Wong Jack Man didn't leave. Some accounts differ on who suggested they settle it physically, not as a street fight, as a test, a private demonstration of whose approach held more value. If Lee lost, he would agree to stop teaching non-Chinese students. If Wong Jack Man lost, the traditional community would stop interfering. Lee agreed. The room rearranged itself. Students moved to the edges. Wong Jack Man's group formed a loose line near the wall. Linda stayed back, uncertain what she was about to witness. No one set a timer. No one outlined rules. Wong Jack Man removed his jacket. Lee stayed in his street clothes, black pants, a simple shirt. They stood maybe 10 feet apart. The air in that room changed. And then it started. There were no contracts, no signed documents, just an understanding between men who'd grown up in systems where your word carried consequences. Lee's student, James Yim Lee, no relation, but a close friend and training partner, stood near the back. He knew what this meant. If Bruce lost, the school's reputation collapsed. This wasn't about points or judges. It was about who walked out of that room with their authority intact. Wong Jack Man's group had brought David Chin, another practitioner. He watched from the side, arms crossed. Years later, people would argue about what he saw, what he remembered. But in that moment, He was just another witness holding his breath. Linda Lee stood furthest from the center. She'd met Bruce in Seattle, married him despite her family's concerns, followed him to Oakland when he decided to build something here. She'd seen him teach, seen him move, but she'd never seen him in anything like this. The room was maybe 20 feet by 30. Not large, one window facing the street, blinds half closed, wooden floor worn, smooth in the center where students train daily, a few Wing Chun dummies against one wall. The space felt smaller now, with 15, maybe 20 people pressed against the edges. Wong Jack Man took a stance, classical, weight distributed, hands positioned in a guard that had been refined over centuries. Northern Shaolin emphasized fluidity, long-range striking, intricate footwork. He looked composed, ready. Lee stood more upright. His Wing Chun base was visible in how he held his center line, but there was something else already, an openness, a readiness to close distance fast. He'd been experimenting, mixing systems, adding Western boxing elements, fencing footwork. Someone said something in Cantonese, a signal maybe, or just an acknowledgement that both men were ready. No one rang a bell, no one said go. Lee moved first. He closed the gap faster than Wong Jack Man expected, a straight punch aimed at the center line. Wong deflected, pivoted, created space. Lee followed. Another punch, another. His tempo was aggressive, pressing, refusing to let Wong settle into the rhythm of traditional exchange. Wong Jack Man circled. His footwork was clean, economical. He wasn't trying to match Lee's speed. He was trying to control distance, to frustrate the aggression. A few strikes came back testing, probing. Lee blocked one, slipped another. The room was silent except for footfalls and breathing. Linda's hands were clenched. She didn't know enough about fighting to judge who was winning, but she could see Bruce's face. The concentration, the intensity. This wasn't sparring. Wong Jack Man moved toward the back of the room. Lee followed. The space shrank further. Wong's group shifted to give them room. One of Lee's students, Jesse Glover, who'd followed Bruce down from Seattle, leaned forward slightly, watching every exchange. Lee pressed harder. He was trying to end it, trying to land something decisive. But Wong Jack Man kept moving, kept deflecting, kept making Lee chase. 30 seconds became a minute. A minute became 2. Lee's frustration was starting to show, not in his technique, not yet, but in the rhythm. He expected this to be faster, cleaner. But Wong Jack Man wasn't collapsing under the pressure. Wong tried a kick. Lee checked it, countered with a punch that grazed Wong's shoulder. Wong reset, moved again. The pattern continued, Lee advancing, Wong retreating, neither man landing anything that stopped the other. James Yim Lee glanced at Linda. She was pale. He looked back at the fight. Something had to break. Wong Jack Man's back was near the wall now. Lee had been pushing forward for almost 3 minutes, and the space had compressed into something tighter, more desperate. Lee threw a combination. Straight punch, low kick, another punch. Wong blocked the first, evaded the second, but the third clipped his ribs. Not hard enough to drop him, but enough that everyone saw it land. Wong's expression didn't change. He sidestepped, moved along the wall, trying to circle back toward open space. Lee cut him off. This was the moment Lee had trained for close range, high pressure, overwhelming speed. His Wing Chun background taught him to dominate the center line once you controlled it. But Wong Jack Man wasn't cooperating. He kept slipping just out of reach, kept using angles Lee had to adjust for. Wong threw a palm strike. Lee parried and countered with a back fist that missed by inches. Wong dropped his level, tried to sweep Lee's lead leg. Lee pulled it back, fired a knee that caught air. They separated for half a second. Both men were breathing harder now. Linda noticed Bruce's shirt was damp with sweat. His jaw was set in that way she recognized when something wasn't going. How he planned. Wong Jack Man's face was flushed but still composed. Lee charged again. This time he changed tactics. Instead of trying to strike through Wong's defense, he grabbed, got a hold of Wong's arm, tried to trap it. Wong twisted, broke the grip, created separation. Lee followed immediately. Another grab attempt. Another break. The fight had become something uglier than either man probably imagined. No elegant forms. No demonstration of superior philosophy. Just two people trying to impose their will on each other in a confined space. Wong Jack Man moved toward the door, not retreating, repositioning. But it looked like retreat. Lee saw the opening and pressed harder, a flurry of punches, faster than before, some landing on Wong's arms and shoulders, one grazing his face. Wong tried to counter, but Lee was too close now. Then Lee grabbed again. This time he held on, pulled Wong off balance. Wong stumbled just slightly, and Lee drove him backward. They hit the wall. Not hard, but definitive. Wong Jack Man's group shifted. One of them started to move forward. James Yim Lee stepped into the line, blocking without saying a word. The man stopped. Lee had Wong pinned for a moment. Wong pushed off, created space, but his breathing was labored now. Lee looked exhausted too, but he had momentum. Wong circled one more time. Lee followed, cutting angles, not letting him reset. Another exchange punches, a knee, a grab attempt. Wong blocked most of it, but he was running out of room. Lee landed a solid punch to Wong's torso. Then another. Wong's hands dropped slightly. Just for a second. But it was enough for everyone to see. Wong Jack Man turned, started moving toward the door. Not running. Walking with purpose. Like he was done. Lee didn't chase him. He stood in the center of the room, chest heaving, watching Wong gather his jacket. Someone from Wong's group said something in Cantonese. Wong replied quietly. Then he left. His group followed. No handshakes. No acknowledgments. Just footsteps on the stairs. The door closed. The room stayed silent for several seconds. Lee's students looked at each other. Linda moved toward Bruce but stopped when she saw his face. He wasn't celebrating. He looked angry. James Yim Lee started to say something, but Bruce cut him off with a gesture. He walked to the back of the room, grabbed a towel, wiped his face. "That took too long," he said. His voice was flat. Jesse Glover didn't understand. "You won." Lee shook his head. "I should have finished it in 30 seconds. Linda watched him walk to the window. He stared out at the street below. Wong Jack Man's group was visible for a moment, then gone. Bruce Lee had won the fight. He defended his right to teach whoever he wanted. The traditional community would have to accept it or stay silent. But something in that room had broken for him, some assumption about his own skill, his own system. He'd trained for years, built speed and power that impressed everyone who sparred with him, and it had taken him 3 minutes to force a concession from one man. That didn't sit right. He turned away from the window, looked at his students. "Class is over. Go home." They hesitated, then left. Linda stayed. So did James. Bruce sat on the floor, back against the wall. He stared at his hands. They were shaking slightly, adrenaline, exhaustion, something else. "What's wrong?" Linda asked. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. "Everything I thought I knew. It's not enough." The next morning, Bruce Lee couldn't move properly. Not injured, nothing broken. But his back had seized up during the night, the kind of stiffness that comes from fighting with every muscle locked. Linda helped him sit up. He didn't complain, but she could see it in how carefully he moved. James Yim Lee came by around noon. Found Bruce standing in the studio, staring at the space where the fight had happened. "You all right?" James asked. Bruce didn't turn around. "I got tired. Midway through, I got tired." James waited. I couldn't catch him, Bruce continued. I was faster, stronger. But he kept moving, and I couldn't pin him down until I grabbed him. That's not skill. James had seen the fight, seen Bruce win. But he understood what Bruce wasn't saying. Winning ugly felt like losing. If my way works, Bruce said, it should have been over immediately. It wasn't. He walked to the Wing Chun dummy, placed his hand on the wooden arms. He'd spent years on this thing, thousands of hours practicing chains, trapping, centerline theory. Wing Chun is too rigid, he said quietly. Too committed to staying in place. I had to chase him around the whole room because I was trying to fight from a rooted position. James didn't argue. He'd been training with Bruce long enough to know when to listen. Over the next few days, people started talking. Word had gotten out, and not details, but the outline. Bruce Lee fought someone from the traditional schools. Bruce Lee won. The non-Chinese students could stay. But Bruce wasn't interested in the victory narrative. Linda noticed the change first. He stopped teaching certain techniques, stopped emphasizing the classical forms. When students asked about Wing Chun sequences, he'd show them once, then say, "Now forget the pattern, just hit." He started running. Long distances, building cardio in a way he'd never prioritized before. He'd always been fast, always had explosive power. But sustained output fighting for minutes instead of seconds, that was different. Wong Jack Man had exposed that gap. He also started questioning range. Wing Chun was built for close quarters, but Wong Jack Man had used distance to frustrate him. Bruce began studying Western boxing more seriously, watching footage, analyzing footwork, how fighters like Sugar Ray Robinson controlled space without committing their structure. One afternoon, Jesse Glover came to train. Bruce handed him gloves and told him to move. Just move. Don't engage, don't commit, just stay out of range. Jesse did. Bruce chased him around the room for 2 minutes, trying different approaches. When they stopped, Bruce was breathing hard again. "That's the problem," he said. "I'm thinking about technique. I should be thinking about position." Bruce started writing. Notes, observations, critiques of his own system. Pages of analysis about what worked in that fight and what failed. Linda found them scattered around their apartment. One page had a single line circled multiple times. "The best technique is the one that gets you to the target. Everything else is decoration." He stopped calling what he taught kung fu. Stopped using the Chinese terminology for most things. When students asked what style they were learning, he'd pause, then say, "I'm not teaching a style. I'm teaching you to fight." James watched the transformation with respect and concern. Bruce had always been intense, always been a perfectionist. But this was different. This felt like demolition. "You won the fight," James reminded him one evening. Bruce shook his head. "I won because I was younger and I didn't quit. That's not the same as being right." He sat on the floor, stretched his back. It still bothered him sometimes. A reminder, if I'd fought someone better, he said, someone faster or stronger or with more endurance, I would have lost, and that means my system is incomplete. James started to respond, but Bruce cut him off. "I don't want to teach something incomplete." The studio stayed quiet. Outside, Oakland was moving into evening. Traffic sounds, distant voices. But Bruce Lee cared, and he wasn't going to let it go. By early 1965, Bruce Lee had stopped teaching Wing Chun entirely. He didn't announce it, didn't make a formal declaration. He just quietly removed the techniques that no longer made sense to him. The classical stances went first, then the rigid hand positions, then the idea that you had to control the center line before you could strike effectively. His students noticed. Some were confused. They'd signed up to learn kung fu. Now he was teaching them something that didn't have a name yet. Ted Wong, one of his students, asked him directly one day, "Is this still Wing Chun?" Bruce looked at him for a moment. Does it matter what it's called if it works? Ted didn't have an answer for that. Bruce had become obsessed with efficiency. Every movement had to justify itself. If a technique required 3 steps when 2 would work, he discarded it. The philosophy was simple: strip everything down to function. He started calling it scientific street fighting in casual conversation. Later, he'd use different terms, but the core idea was forming martial arts as a personal investigation, not an inherited system. Linda watched him train alone for hours. He'd face the mirror and repeat a single punch 50 times, making micro-adjustments each repetition, changing the angle, adjusting his hip rotation, testing how much power he could generate with minimal telegraph. "What are you looking for?" she asked him once. "The shortest distance," he said, "between intention and result." He brought in training equipment no traditional school would use. A heavy bag for Western boxing, speed bags, jump ropes, weight training equipment, barbells, dumbbells, resistance tools. Some of the older Chinese practitioners would have seen this as corrupting the art. Bruce saw it as necessary. His body changed. He'd always been lean, but now he was developing muscle definition that looked more like a boxer. His forearms became corded with sinew. His core developed visible separation. He was building a physique for function, not aesthetics. James Yam Lee helped him experiment. They'd spar with different rules. Only kicks allowed. Only punches. One person attacking, one defending. They'd film some sessions, watch the footage, analyze what worked. There, that half-second where I'm repositioning, that's wasted time. He'd go back and eliminate the wasted motion. The students who stayed saw something unprecedented. Bruce wasn't teaching them to replicate his movements. He was teaching them to question everything. "If it works for you, use it," he'd tell them. "If it doesn't, throw it away. I don't care if it's traditional." Does it work when someone's trying to hit you? Some students left. They wanted the mysticism, the ancient wisdom. Bruce had no patience for that anymore. "There are no secrets," he'd say. "There's just work." He started incorporating Western fencing footwork. The linear advances and retreats, the idea of maintaining range while staying mobile. He studied Olympic fencers how they could cover distance explosively, then retreat just as fast. He took pieces from everywhere. Boxing's jab, fencing's lunge, Wing Chun's trapping but modified, simplified, savate kicks, judo throws but only the ones that weren't standing up. Nothing was sacred. Dan Innocento started training with him during this period. Dan had a background in multiple systems Filipino martial arts, judo, karate. Bruce appreciated that. Someone who already understood that no single style had all the answers. They'd work through scenarios. What if someone grabs you? What if they're bigger? What if they're faster? For each scenario, Bruce would strip away the theoretical and focus on what actually worked under pressure. "Most martial arts are about looking good," he told Dan one evening. "I'm not interested in looking good, I'm interested in not getting hit." The fight with Wong Jack Man never left his mind. It became a reference point, a measurement. He'd replay it mentally, see where he'd wasted energy, where he'd been inefficient. Linda asked him once if he regretted it. The fight. He thought about it. "No," he said. "It showed me what I didn't know." Most people never get that. By late 1965, Bruce had something resembling a coherent system. Not complete, he'd never consider it complete but functional, based on principles instead of patterns. He started using the term Jeet Kune Do occasionally. The way of the intercepting fist. It wasn't a style, it was an approach, a philosophy of constant adaptation. Some of his students asked for a curriculum, a belt system, ranks. Bruce refused. "The moment I formalize this, it becomes dead. It becomes another rigid system someone will have to break out of later." He wanted them to understand this wasn't about creating a new tradition. It was about rejecting the idea of tradition entirely. James saw the full arc, from the young teacher who'd arrived in Oakland confident in his Wing Chun lineage, to this restless investigator who trusted nothing he couldn't verify personally. "You think differently now," James observed. Bruce nodded. "I had to. That fight proved I couldn't rely on what I was taught. I had to find what actually works, and that's different for everyone." The studio on Broadway felt different now, too. Less formal, more experimental. Students sparred with minimal rules. Bruce watched, offered adjustments, pushed them to find their own solutions. He'd stopped trying to create practitioners of his method. He was trying to create people who could think for themselves under pressure. And it all traced back to that closed room. That 3-minute struggle that should have been 30 seconds. That moment when Bruce Lee's confidence in his inherited system shattered and forced him to build something new from the pieces. The fight stayed quiet for years. Wong Jack Man didn't talk about it publicly. Bruce Lee mentioned it occasionally to students, but always in the context of what he learned, not what he won. The witnesses scattered. Some moved away. Some stopped training. The story existed in fragments. Then, slowly, it started to surface. First in small martial arts circles, then in magazines. By the early 1970s, when Bruce Lee had become a film star in Hong Kong and was breaking into Hollywood, people wanted to know about the man behind the movies. The fight became part of his origin story. But the details had already started to shift. Some accounts said it lasted 20 minutes. Others said it was over in seconds. Some claimed Wong Jack Man was knocked unconscious. Others said he left because the agreed-upon time had expired. Bruce's version emphasized his frustration with how long it took. Wong's version, when he eventually shared it decades later, suggested the fight was more even. Linda Lee, in interviews after Bruce's death in 1973, described it as the turning point. The moment her husband realized he needed to evolve beyond traditional kung fu. She mentioned his back pain, his exhaustion, his anger at himself. James Yim Lee, before he died in 1972, confirmed the basics. A challenge was issued. A fight happened. Bruce won but wasn't satisfied. He remembered Bruce sitting on the floor afterward, staring at his hands. The students who were there had their own memories, but memory is unreliable, especially when decades pass and the person at the center becomes a legend. What nobody disputed, something changed in Bruce Lee after that day. The transformation was too obvious, too documented. Students who trained with him before Oakland and after Oakland learned completely different systems. Dan Innocento, who became one of Bruce's closest training partners, often said the fight was essential to understanding Bruce's philosophy. He had to fail, Dan explained in seminars. Not fail completely, but fail his own standards. That's what pushed him to question everything. The fight became mythology. Films depicted it. Books analyzed it. Martial artists debated what really happened. Wong Jack Man gave interviews in his later years that contradicted some of Bruce's account. He suggested it was more of a sparring match, that Bruce exaggerated the stakes. Maybe he did. Or maybe the stakes felt different depending on which side you were on. But the physical details, who landed what, how long it lasted, who dominated those, became less important over time. What mattered was the aftermath. What Bruce Lee did with his frustration. By the mid-1960s, martial arts in America were still largely segregated by style and lineage. Karate schools taught karate. Kung fu schools taught karate. Kung fu schools taught kung fu. Cross-training was rare. The idea that you could take useful pieces from multiple systems and discard the rest was almost heretical. Bruce Lee made it normal. Not immediately. Not single-handedly, but his influence through his students, his films, his writings, helped shift the culture. By the 1990s, mixed martial arts would become mainstream. Fighters combined boxing, wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai. They borrowed techniques without caring about tradition. That approach started in a private room in Oakland, when a 23-year-old teacher fought a traditional practitioner and walked away unsatisfied with his own victory. The students Bruce trained after 1964 felt the difference immediately. Ted Wong studied with him for years and always said Bruce's teaching became more direct, more personal, less concerned with preserving forms. He wanted you to find your own way, Ted explained. He'd show you principles, but you had to discover how they worked for your body, your instincts. Taiki Kimura, who ran Bruce's school in Seattle, noticed it too. Bruce would visit, and the lessons were different. More sparring, less drilling, more questions, fewer answers. He'd ask, "Why are you doing it that way?" Taiki remembered. And if you said, "Because that's how you taught me," he'd shake his head. "That's not good enough." The closed door in Oakland became a dividing line. Before and after. Traditional and evolved. Wong Jack Man continued teaching in San Francisco. He maintained his traditional approach. He had students, respect, a place in the community. When asked about Bruce Lee in later years, he was measured. He acknowledged the fight, but downplayed its significance. Perhaps for him, it was just another sparring session. For Bruce, it was the inflection point. Linda kept some of his notes from that period. Pages of handwriting. Diagrams, frustrations written out. One page had a line that she shared in interviews years later. "Today I learned I don't know enough. Tomorrow I'll start fixing that." The fight lasted 3 minutes, maybe 4, in a room most people will never see, in a building that might not exist anymore. No footage. No definitive record. Just witnesses who remembered different versions of the same event. But Bruce Lee's entire approach to martial arts changed afterward. And through him, so did the approach of thousands of others. People debate the details. They always will. But the students who trained with Bruce after 1964 knew something had shifted. His movements became sharper. His teaching became more demanding. He had less patience for tradition and more respect for results. Some left inspired. Others unsettled. That stayed with people.